everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Parallel Barking. I'm Ariana Backer, and I'm here with...
Oh, you want me to introduce myself?
I do.
Larry Backer. Hi, everyone. Welcome back.
And today we're going to talk about something quite clever. A pregnant woman who was given an HOV ticket.
What's HOV?
HOV
for those of our listeners who don't know these things.
Is heavy traffic. What is it? Heavy occupancy vehicle. Heavy occupancy.
See, this is a problem. This is a problem with these acronyms.
Yeah,
right.
Can't remember what the heck.
High occupancy vehicles, right?
High occupancy vehicle lane, and you use these lanes for when you have two or more people.
Right,
and
to encourage carpooling.
Yes,
and to reduce the number of cars on the road, and therefore to reduce carbon and et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
So they're a great idea.
They're great ideas. And if you get into one of these lanes and
in some jurisdictions, wait, just for a little background, some jurisdictions, the minimum is different everywhere. So in some, it's a minimum of 2 people, in some it's 3 people, and in some it may be high, right? But in many jurisdictions, it's 2 people.
Right. So, and if you get into one of these lanes with less than the minimum, then you're going to get ticketed.
And sometimes these tickets can be very expensive.
Yes, hundreds of dollars. And so here's the story of this lovely lady named Brandy Bottone. And she was in Texas, North Texas. And at the time, she was pregnant and driving in the HOV lane. But she was ticketed. She was ticketed while driving in that HOV lane.
Of course, there's only one person in the car.
There's only one person in that car, right? However, Brandy does not believe that she deserves that ticket. You want to know why? Do you want to know why, everybody?
It's not that she doesn't deserve a ticket. She may well deserve the ticket, but that the law as written makes it impossible for the state to collect
for the state to issue that ticket. You want to know why, everyone?
No. Yes, tell us.
Brandy has suggested that the reversal of Roe versus Wade means that her fetus is a second passenger, and the HOV lane is
and she complies with the HOV
she complies with the HOV lane rules.
Yay, good for her. That's very clever.
Yay!
It's very clever. So what do you think of this?
I think it's freaking fabulous. I want everybody, every pregnant woman ever I'm going to get pregnant just to ride in HOV lanes all across the nation.
And you know who's going to thank you?
No one.
The Right to Life people, because you will have made their point that life begins at conception, and that therefore you become the poster child for the constitutional amendment setting out that life begins at conception, and that therefore
I guess I'll want to wait. I'll wait until I see the result, because if they try to overturn this, then I'll be like, hey.
Well, yeah, except the Dobbs case had nothing to do with the personhood of the fetus, God, it's, things are bad when whatever word you use to describe this is now politically charged, and people will
I don't really, even in Alito's opinion, he wrote something like Roe never even addressed abortion because they they called it the potential to life. So it didn't even count. It technically didn't even cover the right to abortion.
Yeah, I know he's being very prissy, but that's his style. And, that kind of cattiness is fairly demeaning, but he's been waiting for his whole life to write that. And now he feels, right, meow, now he feels vindicated for being.
Yeah.
But the problem is, in a sense, what Dobbs decided, and that's what makes this story really interesting. Dobbs had nothing to do with anything that's going on in this HOV lane, right? The case Dobbs, the idea of Dobbs does, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what Dobbs says is, look, there is no federal guarantee for women's autonomy in the federal Constitution. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that the Constitution as currently written doesn't have it, and that therefore either there's got to be a federal law
what women
have, or
what
state,
autonomy they have.
Right, or states are free to decide in the absence of a federal constitutional protection of women's autonomy. States are free to decide. So it's really a federalism issue, but they don't decide. So it's not a case, which was my big fear with these cases, given the people who are on the court, is that in fact they would have taken this not as an opportunity for overturning Roe, but as an opportunity for inverting Roe by saying, we take this opportunity to say, yeah, in fact, we find lots of rights in the Constitution, and one of them is the rights of fetuses to full protection from the moment of conception. That would have been interesting, but they didn't go there. They said, okay, this goes back to the states. So the case Dobbs is really one that says, knock yourself out. We're going to have 50 high drama events in every state, and we're going to do all the stuff that we've started doing since the decision was leaked. The idea, right, the semiotics, sorry, I had to use that term, the meaning of Dobbs as a cultural or political or social thing is then very different, because it's there that we begin to have the discussion about what are you carrying, to what extent is it autonomous, to what extent is it a person, to what extent do your rights as the woman relate to this thing, blah, 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 blah. Dobbs is really the incarnation of this complicated cultural and social discussion, which then shows up in things like this, right? So from her perspective, and it's not, it wasn't wrong.
It's not wrong.
Quite interesting. But again, every time you do this, right, it'll have ramifications. So yeah, if you want to stick your middle finger in the face of the great minders of the HOV legislation, fabulous. And
but it's also dangerous for.
Yeah, it's also right. So we're now in this realm of unintended consequences, and we see this. And this is my way of then bringing something else in. At about the time that this is happening, or this is being reported, something else is being reported, right? President Biden issued an executive order.
Oh, you mean that milquetoast order?
Oh, you're being so judgmental. I thought the order was actually very interesting. Says, all right, so here's two problems, right? It's a milquetoast. A lot of people who feel very passionately about women's reproductive rights and women's autonomy take the position that this is milquetoast. And in a sense it is, but recall that the reason the president is now limited to relatively milquetoast executive orders is that a whole lot of people spent 4 years during the Trump administration litigating against the authority of the president to rule by executive order, saying that that was anti-democratic. I cannot, and you know that there was a litigation that almost seemed to be spawned every day, every time the president, in this case, President Trump, right, issued an executive order, anti-democratic, we now have rule by an emperor, blah, blah, blah. And there was a huge amount, relatively speaking, of cases that were then decided by the courts, especially by quote unquote liberal judges, that then reframed the entire, both the scope of presidential authority and the administrative rules that guided administrators in the context of abuse of administrative discretion. And everyone was thrilled. Hooray, ding dong, the witch is dead, or at least we've hobbled her in the form of Mr. Trump.
So then what's the point of an executive order then?
Well, in this case, that's what makes this order interesting. And I thought that they did a fairly good job, given these limitations, right?
Okay,
Limitations that the people who now find them kind of constraining have to work against. Given that, I think that they did some very interesting things. And again, this is the woman in the HOV lane issue, some of which will have unintended consequences. So there are two things that are going on, two or three things that are going on with the executive order, which I thought was kind of interesting. One was to, and I think a very good one, is to move the federal government into much more actively into the control of the narrative and information. And so a lot of this is section 3 of the executive order that effectively tries to figure out how the federal government can reach out, especially to women who may not have access to or don't have information, to reach out to them in a very aggressive and proactive way, to give them all the information they need in order to know their rights and to know the options that they may have in order to make decisions that make sense for them in exercising their personal
Like
autonomy.
PSAs in the 90s?
Well, I think a little more than that. So they talk about things like the right to medication, potential actions, protection of access to the full range of reproductive health care systems, including family planning, increase in outreach and education about access to these services by launching public awareness initiatives. And you know, you can sneer at that, but
Are they putting
especially
money?
if you're poor and you're marginalized and you don't have access to information, that's the first step in order to decide.
Right. But are there
Well,
funds attached to
well,
these
that would be
initiatives?
the question. That would be the question, isn't it? There's information sharing. But for me, one of the most interesting things about this was the, and this is section 3B, and that was to promote access to reproductive health services. The Attorney General and the Counsel to the President are going to convene a meeting of private pro bono attorneys, bar associations, and public interest organizations in order to encourage lawyers, with the encouragement of the executive branch, to encourage lawyers to represent and assist patients, providers, and third parties lawfully seeking these services throughout the country. So what the president is saying, and that's what makes this executive order actually quite interesting. What he's saying is he's putting the power of the office of the president behind all kinds of
All these
litigation
lawyers.
with NGOs, states, and others that are going to try to use to assert what rights they believe they have, the rights to interstate commerce, negative Commerce Clause power, the right to protect your own liberties, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right, and they will back them. They'll back the bar associations, they'll back states, they'll back third parties, they'll back employers who are willing to have their employees go from a state that has become negative with respect to this to a state where they can more freely exercise their rights. So that's kind of be interesting. But again, the unintended consequences, we don't know what they are, but they're there. What I thought was more interesting here is section 4, which they call protecting privacy, safety, and security. And here, what I thought this was very clever. They may be doing a couple of things. One is thinking through the issue of preemption, federal preemption through all kinds of state aid programs. 2, using the taxing and spending power. If in fact, most states are now Medicare states or Medicaid states, these are federal state programs in which the federal government can control the terms under which they can give states money. And there's no reason why the federal government cannot attach to their spending power all kinds of requirements, including the requirements to make access to reproductive health available. They can also make that possible potentially through Medicare. So that's one thing. The other thing that's really interesting is the way in which they are now urging a rethinking of HIPAA privacy rules, that is medical information privacy. And you go, well, that's kind of out of left field.
What?
It's not. It's not. If in fact your information is protected, right? Is it possible for you to argue that the federal government's protection of medical privacy extends against, for example, local state attorneys who seek your information in order to begin civil or criminal proceedings against you for exercising reproductive autonomy rights, right? Can you go against patients? Can you seek patients' records, right, in order to enforce state laws against abortion? So let's see what happens here, but that's kind of an interesting little twist.
Well, see, that's
that
why
may
I
or may
didn't
not bear fruit.
understand why the privacy of the 14th Amendment didn't hold. Like, what we have laws on the books that make it so that that protect our privacy, especially our medical privacy. So why was that ignored? But
well, it's not been ignored. There are two things that are going on, right? So one is the constitutional right, which is this big amorphous principle-y thing that then has to be applied in different contexts. The other is the laws that are created under the powers that are delegated to the federal government to do this, including, and we've done this for reasons other than abortion, including these great advances in protecting medical privacy. We have them. The thing is, when these were written, of course, no one was thinking that Roe would be overturned. And so it's not clear, since this was not in anyone's radar when these things were written, that it would apply. And so what the executive order does is guide administrative agencies and perhaps guide Congress in reworking some of this stuff to make things that are likely there, right? So the bar associations in Section 3 would be encouraged to litigate this in that way. At the same time, right, the administrative agencies in Congress would be encouraged to refine the regulations or the statutes authorizing these regulations to make it crystal clear. So that's the point here. And here you see a nice combination between Section 3's, let's encourage people to exercise their rights everywhere they can by doing or litigating, with Section 4, which is now we got to refine the administrative structure, and to the extent the federal government controls things like privacy, or to the extent the federal government can control the terms under which it can give money to states, critical money to states, then we can play with that. And then the other thing they're doing is fraudulent practices. So what they want to do is, and I'm not clear what this means, but they want the Federal Trade Commission to consider options to address deceptive or fraudulent practices related to reproductive health care services, including online, and protect access to accurate information. Right. And so here, what they might do is go after people who either fail to include or to misinclude information about, for example, the health effects of very early abortion, who fail to disclose that that is a possibility that can be considered and available in some states. So that kind of, and we don't know where they're going to go with this, but it's clear that the FTC now has a mandate to go and create rules. And as they create these rules, right, so the Medicare people, the people who are in charge of privacy, and those agencies, the Attorney General and the Federal Trade Commission, as they roll out new interpretations or new applications or new rules, there's going to be litigation. And so there's going to be this flood of litigation, and ultimately designed to produce precisely the kind of evidence that Alito used in order to say that Roe doesn't work. Because one of the things he relied on was to say, oh my God, people are still constantly litigating Roe. Well, what they're going to try to do now is say, well, yes, and now look, 3 years into this, people are still litigating this ridiculous decision that you made. This will be their argument, of course,
Right.
this decision that you made to overturn that. So I think that's really interesting. So all kinds of things are happening, from the woman in Texas who's going to be using this for her own ends, but in a quite cheeky but interesting
Yeah, it
way.
could lead to disastrous results.
Well, maybe, but maybe not. But what it really goes back to is my suggestion that what winds up happening here, this is like the free exercise of religion back in the 60s and 70s. There's this huge split. There's the technical decision, right? The law, and that everyone's going to ascribe to the Supreme Court. And then there's the political, social, and cultural manifestation of this thing, which in a lot of ways has almost nothing to do with the decision, but the decision becomes a shorthand for this big cultural discussion, which is going to, my guess, intensify much more before people calm down.
Yeah, and before you can actually talk about the specifics of how you're going to even litigate or talk about or legislate something like that. Like, even this, when this woman was talking to the cop, she said, she's like, oh, there are two of us here. And the cop is like, where? And she's like, I've got a baby girl right here. And his response was, it has to be two bodies outside of the body.
And she go, I can make that happen. Right.
Must have been a real awkward situation.
Right. And you can see just, the fun will never end. Right. So I can be the absolute lunatic district attorney who would then contest her decision, her assertion that in fact there were two people in the car, her and her fetus, by saying, well, the fetus has no capacity, right, to make the decision, and in a sense, you have involuntarily controlled this fetus's
decision to ride,
and that therefore the HOV lane statute has to be interpreted to apply only to people who are in the car willingly. And since this fetus has no capacity to will anything and is your prisoner inside your body, then the HOV lane won't. So you can, this is almost the beginning of a comedy routine.
You're a prisoner. You've imprisoned that baby.
Well, the fetus, we don't know if it's viable yet.
That's true. That fetus, you've imprisoned that fetus.
Right. And so all kinds of merriment is likely to ensue. And we're going to see lots of this thing. And I mentioned this earlier, everything from, how you're going to litigate the getting abortion pills, what's it called? The morning after pills in the mail. The states can do lots of things. They can't control the mail. Criminalizing activities that you go somewhere else to do, that's going to be a big problem. And at this point, if I were in Vegas, I would be very nervous, because if all of a sudden Texas says that they can criminalize a woman who wants to get an abortion in New York because she travels to New York to get a legal abortion there because abortions are illegal in Texas, then at some point someone is likely to say, well, I'm going to sue Mary Jane, who gambling is illegal in Texas. I'm going to sue her because I know that she went to Circus where she spent money on the slot machines, and that's illegal in the state of Texas. So
well, if I were New York, I would make it illegal to cooperate with law enforcement in Texas on
Right. Well, that's coming. That's coming.
It's already happened in Washington State. So yeah.
Right. It's happened in Washington State. I believe it's already happened in California. Connecticut was thinking about this. There are a number of states. So, again, the fun and games go on, but booyah to this very, very clever woman, but also welcome to this kind of dissociated world where Dobbs is now going to acquire a life of its own. And that's all I got.
Yep. Yeah, yep. This is uncharted territory.
Right. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting. Let's see what happens. And this is not the only thing. We haven't had a chance to talk about the religion cases yet. And that were decided this last term, the coach who can go to the middle of the field and pray after a football game, and the requirement that I think it was Maine has to fund religious schools.
What?
Yeah, I'll tell you, you see, you've been so busy.
No. I heard about the coach, but I did not hear about Maine having to fund.
Yeah, because it was clothed in this highly technical decision, and everyone's eyes are going to roll one paragraph into this opinion. But the opinion is actually quite interesting, because effectively we have finally nailed probably one of the last nails in the coffin of that wall of separation between church and state.
Yay.
A project that a certain faction of the judiciary and their fellow travelers have been dedicating their lives to since probably the middle of the 1950s. Taken them 70 years, but persistence pays.
It's the whining and dining that really does it.
It's decisions that are being made, and no one with enough skin in the game to try to halt or prevent it. And then that leads us back to, are you really happy with the courts doing all of this? And the answer may be, well, we hate the courts, but there's no better way. The alternatives are even worse, but anyway, so two cases. But anyway, until next time.
Yeah. Until next time, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Woof, woof.
Bark, bark.